All right, we're getting started. Welcome here at the New Flat Rate. We decided to have a impromptu meeting today on how to help contractors set their billable hour, because we get asked that question a lot. So we're going to have an interactive class here with our team as we answer questions and everybody gets on the same page. So, is everybody ready?
Woo!
Give me a big hoo-ah.
Hoo-ah!
Hoo-ah! Let's build the energy. Here we go. Exciting conversation. So we're going to start. I'm going to use a little bit of some examples from some of the coaching and stuff we do in our other avenues. We've got a best practice group called Freedom Builders University, where we teach CEOs and business owners and high-level managers better ways to run and evolve the business. And so I'm going to use a little bit of that to kind of help set the stage. And so when it comes to the billable hour, we get asked all the time, how do I set it, especially if I don't have great numbers, if I'm not good at tracking things and things like that. And so I want to take you back to an example. And the example that we use is what I call the 4 quadrants of business finance. And so that's going to look like this. And so we're going to start with this T-grid here. And I'm going to ask the question. The question is this. If we were going to run a very simple business and put all of the business financials into 4 categories, what would those 4 categories be? Now, just spitballing here, the 4 categories typically would be number 1, labor, because we've got to pay people, right? So we got to pay everybody, so we've got a labor category. The second category is we're probably going to use some stuff. So that category is materials. And so we've got labor, we got materials. Then we have business overhead. If you're not familiar with what overhead is all of the things that a company has to pay for, whether we do any jobs today or not. This, of course, would be your insurance, your rent, your licensing, your truck payments, your tools, all that kind of stuff, your office staff, things of that would go into overhead. And then the last category here is the fact that the point of any business is to make sure that we turn a profit. And so we've got labor, materials, overhead, and profit. Now, for all practical purposes, these are the 4 main categories of business. Now, the next thing we want to look at is if a business is working properly, then it is bringing in what? Revenue, that's right. We can call that money, we can call it revenue, we can call it cash, whatever it is, or cash flow, but it's bringing in revenue. And so when it comes to revenue has to be allocated. And so in this example, real quick, that we're going to use, I'm going to look at revenue as a percentage. Now, I know you can't take percentages to the bank, but when it comes to revenue, it needs to be allocated as a percentage to each one of these categories in order for your business to be profitable, in order for us to have the money we need to do what we got to do, to know if we can hire people and things like that as well. And so when it comes to revenue, I call revenue 100%. And the reason for that is you'll always have 100% of what you got. Does that make sense? Now with revenue, there's no such thing as extra credit. You cannot have 105% of revenue. You can only have 100%. You can't have 90% of revenue. You can only have 100%. Is everybody with me on that?
Yes. And
so in which case, when it comes to this 100%, we're going to allocate a percentage to each one of these. But when I started looking at this, I said, a perfectly ran business, you can call this a unicorn, a mythical creature, whatever it is, but a perfectly ran business would be in balance. And so in balance. And so what does it mean to run a business in balance? And it reminds me of, if you go back into the old days of, the Roman Empire and Greece and all those smart people of the day, they used to hold those scales, that the scales were usually gold and they were on chains. You ever seen one of those chain scales that goes both sides? And so, but there is a version of those scales that if you can picture it for a second, instead of having one on each side, it's got one on 4 corners. And so it's got one here, one here, one here, and one here. And so in which case, that's what I want you to picture of this. If it was going to be imbalanced, just like those scales, and so we were going to allocate an equal amount of revenue to each one of those categories, how much of a percentage would be in each category?
25%.
25%, that's right. So we would have 25%, 25%, 25%, and 25%. Now, something I'm not going to go through today is, in detail, is what happens when we make poor business decisions. But I'll give you a hint of it. If I make a poor decision, or not always a poor decision, but a rash decision when my company's not ramping up or it's not ready for it, that would be kind of like if, hey, today I was a one-man operator and I decided that I was tired of carrying my own tool bag, and so I was going to go ahead and hire Aaron as a helper just to carry my tool bag. Well, the moment I hire Aaron as my helper, what happens to labor?
Goes up.
It goes up. And so let's just say that the labor goes to 30% because now I have a helper, Aaron. So my question for you is, if I do the math now, I'm at 105% of revenue. Am I allowed to have 105%?
No.
Which means that the extra on labor had to come from somewhere. Now, it either had to be offset by choice, meaning I negotiated with my suppliers and got them to drop the supply rates by 5%, so I saved money there. That would balance it out. Or maybe I cut some other overhead somewhere else, but this one you can only cut so much. Some of you need to cut some, but you can only cut it so much. And then, so most likely, where did it come from? It came from profit. This is 99% of the time when we make a business decision like that, it comes right out of profit, and my profit would drop. And so just recognizing that a couple of simple decisions without foresight can drastically reduce a company's profit just overnight. Such as if you you go to buy a new piece of equipment at a supply house and you notice that it's more money than it was before. But you're thinking, well, I already charged so much, I really can't raise the price again. Then where does the extra money come from? Profit, and profit goes down. And so there's all these decisions in business that owners make. So I use this scale, so to say, in our Freedom Builders workshops to describe how business decisions affect the bottom line in a very, very simple format. It just makes it easy. So you might say, well, Matt, what does this have to do with the billable hour? So that's what we're here to talk about today, is your billable hour. Now, yes, billable hour calculators in detail. Can we help you with those? Yes. Can we help you make one? Can we get one for you? Sure, we can do that. But to run a full billable hour calculator in detail, you have to have all of your numbers available. So you got to have your QuickBooks, you got to have the resources on where, what your income is, exactly what your overhead is, what your bills are, all of these things. And if you have historical data, it's going to work the best. So if I have a couple of years worth of things so I can get good solid averages with gross rises and stuff, then I can really factor an exact billable hour with those calculators. The problem is, some of our members don't have all that information, right? So those of you that are account reps here, have you ever talked to one of our members that you ask them for their numbers and they don't have them?
All the time.
All the time. And that's not a bad thing. So anybody that's watching this video later on, that's one of our members, it's not a bad thing. We're not harping on you. The big thing is you're just busy. Right? We just know they're busy. They got things going on. And so they may just not have the time to do it. But what happens sometimes, and what we were seeing, is we would send you like this big billable hour calculator, and you would sit down to do it, and you would open it up and see that, oh my gosh, I got to have all my numbers. This is going to take forever. And so it just never what? Never happens.
Gets done.
It never gets done, so we're using the same billable hour for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. We've had some members that haven't updated their billable hour in like 7 to 10 years. Got a question for you. Has anything changed in society that's raised expenses in the last 7 to 10 years?
Just a little.
So if they haven't raised their prices in 7 to 10 years, what's happened?
They're losing money.
They're losing profit.
Their profit, you got to be careful with that word losing, Adam. They're not necessarily losing money, but their profit is what year after year? It's decreasing. The profit percentage is decreasing. But yet they might be thinking that they're really successful because they use the new flat rate, but they're not realizing that every year they're losing 1 or 2% profit, so it's going down and down and down. So that's to say, how can we help those that just absolutely don't know what their true billable hour is and don't have all their numbers and resources together to get it? How can we help them do that really quick? Well, this is why I started with the 4 quadrants of business financials. And it's got to do with this one here. Is see, if in fact your company is in balance, we actually could generate a billable hour off of any one of these categories if you had the numbers. But the easiest one is labor. Now, labor, we want it set at what percentage?
25.
25% would be the holy grail. Now here's the thing though, that 25% will be total field labor. And so this will be our service techs, this will be our installers, this will be our helpers, this could even be some of the service managers' numbers and stuff according to how overhead and stuff is calculated. And so there could be a lot in this. CSRs we're usually going to put over here in the overhead because we're paying them whether we're bringing in work and things like that or not. But there's actually a lot of people here. And so when it comes to the getting the right number, the number that I like to use for this is actually 20%. And the reason being is I've got 5% over here for those extra employees. So for those helpers and apprentices and things like that. And so I like to use and say, hey, let's take this piece for this exercise. So everybody's got your 4 quadrants. Go ahead and circle 20% right there. And we're going to carry this forward to our billable hour formula. Now, what is the billable hour formula? The billable hour formula says this. Well, if in fact we want to be bringing in enough money so that we can pay out 20% of it to our service technicians that is generating the money, then I've got to start by recognizing the service technicians' hourly pay as 20% of the money we want. Does that make sense? And so at which case, we're going to do this. We've got 20% is our golden number, so I'm going to set that there. And then I'm going to ask the question. And this question sounds a little weird for those of you that aren't used to it, but the question is, if you were going to hire a service technician in your trade that had all of the skills, talents, and abilities that you wanted them to have, that had all the licensing and certificates that you wanted them to have, and had a clean driving record and background check and things like that. And so
You're
everything.
asking for a lot.
What's that?
You're asking for a lot.
I am asking for a lot. That's right. But if you had somebody that was going to come in and apply to work for you that literally could do everything that you wanted them to do, how much would it cost us to hire that person in your market? That's the question that we have to have answered. All right, and you might say, well, man, I don't have any of those people on staff. It doesn't matter. Do you want all of the people that you currently have to become that level? And that answer should be yes. Well, if we want them to become that level, then we have to be collecting enough money in the meantime to make sure we can afford to give them the raises and things along the way as they're getting all their certifications and knowledge and everything together as well. And so in which case, I think of this as, hey, the highest paid tech, but maybe not the highest paid tech you have, maybe the highest paid tech you need. How much would that be? Now, for many of our members today, that number could be as low as, say, $25 an hour in the industry. But for most of you in the larger metropolitan areas where their licensing and stuff is a lot stricter, especially up north and in the bigger cities, those numbers are pushing well over $40 an hour right now. And so generally $45 to even $50 an hour. I was talking to somebody in their market, it's over $70 an hour already. And so in which case, if now my staff is going to quit and go become service techs. You got to work for that. But just so you know, it's not easy, but you can get there. But the point is if you were going to pay, let's use a nice round number here today. Let's just say that we were in a larger city where we were going to need to pay $40 an hour to be able to attract that person. Then let's take that and put that on the board. So $40 an hour. And so if, in fact, I want the $40 an hour that I'm paying them to be 20% of the money that they're bringing in, then does anybody know what the math is that I need to do in order to calculate that?
You count it by 8.
Yeah, so in this case, I can just multiply and make it very simple. I can just go 40, actually not by 8. We're going to do this different because 20% goes into 100% 5 times. And so I just multiply that by 5. And so we got $40 an hour times 5. What is that? 200? Okay. So this gives us $200 an hour. Now some of you right there are already thinking, oh my gosh, Matt, is it really possible for me to charge $200 an hour? Well, if you're going to do this properly, you're going to have to charge a lot more than $200 an hour. All right? However, I want you to understand that the $200 an hour is fine. Whether you're charging $200, $300, $400, $1,000, there's a lot that goes into that of making sure that we're giving the value to our customers, but also geographically, it's different area to area. But all the time, I remember one of our members taught me something one time because I questioned him on his billable hour for a specific thing. He wanted me to raise the price of one item in the new flat rate book significantly, and it was way beyond his billable rate. And so I asked him a question. I said, doesn't really match your billable hour. He said, I know, but he said, Matt, I learned something. I said, what's that? He said, I get the exact same amount of people that complain about my price, whether I charge $500 for that or $900 for it. So he said, if I got to listen to complaints, I'm going to charge $900. And so I started really kind of listening to what he said, and I started paying attention to consumers out there in our service company and your service companies, and I realized he was right. But it wasn't just with that one item, it was across the board. That complaint percentages rarely change when we have to raise prices. Now it's possible. Could you price yourself out of a market? Of course you could. You could go absolutely crazy, right? But the thing is the complaint percentages don't usually change that much. People that are going to complain about price. Whether it's $50 or $500, they just complain. And so I've learned that when it comes to your billable hour, make sure that you're getting the money that you need to handle the complaints. Because can we make everybody happy? No. 2% of the people in the world hate my guts before they ever meet me. They're just destined to be miserable people. And so we can't do anything about those ones. So let's focus on what we can control. And so in which case, once we understand that, then no, this is not too much money, and it's fixing to get a lot more. Because here's the problem we're going to run into. The problem we run into is the fact that if I'm paying somebody $40 an hour, and I say, okay, well, our billable hour is $200, which is technically correct. That's a standard billable hour right there. $200 an hour. What that says, though, is in order to keep our company balanced, and to make sure that we maintain that 20% in the field, that means that we as a company have to bring in $200 an hour for every single hour that we pay this technician $40. Does that make sense? But there's a major problem. And the problem that still lies is what's called efficiency. Because we didn't put an efficiency factor on here. This would factor that we are picking up $200 100% of the hours that we're paying him $40. However, that's just not reality. Because let's think about it. Over the course of the year, if this technician doesn't ever work overtime, then you're going to end up paying them somewhere around 2,080 hours a year. 2,080 hours is a normal 40-hour-a-week job. And so the thing is if we're paying them 2,080 hours a year, then they would have to actually be selling 2,080 hours a year at $200 an hour in order to make all that work. However, the big problem is this. The average service technician in the home service industry sells between 900 to 1,100 hours a year, which is roughly what? It's roughly half.
Half.
Roughly half, that's exactly right. And so if they're only selling half of the hours that we're paying them, then now what's our payroll percentage?
50.
Well, yeah, with this calculation, it would be up to 40%. And so, but if our payroll percentage goes to 40%, is that good or bad? Well, that's really bad, because where did it come from?
Profit.
That's right, it came from profit. And so this is what many of your home service companies are dealing with today, is you're dealing with low profits, and you see that your labor is really, really high, and you don't know why. And it could be because of just efficiency things in your company. It could be because of bad mistakes, but most likely it's a issue in your billable rate. You're not charging enough to take into account the hours that you're not selling. Now, looking at this though, why would we only be selling half of it? Well, the reason we're only selling half is, first of all, sometimes we get like a diagnostic only. And so we don't get the job, right? But also, do sometimes our employees go on vacation? So sometimes they go on vacation. Are they ever sick? Sometimes they're sick. Are we ever slow? Like there's just no work today, or there's only one call for each truck. And so we're just slow. We don't have enough work to keep everybody busy, but we still have to pay them so that they don't quit and go somewhere else, right? And then so all of a sudden, we've got, $40 an hour guys over there sweeping the shop to try to just keep them some work so that we don't have to send them home without a paycheck. But we're losing profit the whole time, but we're also not billing time. And so there's a ton of reasons. Also just traffic is another one. Sometimes you're in a market where you're just sitting in traffic all the time. But just what are the things that make it so that the technicians can't sell as many hours as they need to sell? Now, once we have this information, we learn something. That the average traditional flat rate company, average about 50% efficiency. What that means is they sell roughly half of the hours that they pay their people. And yet, we wonder why we're broke sometimes. But then, we look at new flat rate companies. Cool thing about being a new flat rate company is we show options. The beauty of options is options essentially allow us to have a variable billable hour. What that means is as the customers buy higher options, we're on the jobs longer, which means our efficiency goes up or down. It goes way, way up. And so because it goes up, truth of the matter is we don't actually have to have quite as much per hour as a traditional flat rate company would, because our efficiency went up as well. And so it allows us to have the discounts and stuff built in. But what I want you to understand today is the average company using the new flat rate as directed runs at about 65% efficient today. The best I've ever seen is 75% on the service side. But I would not set your billable hour at 75%. I would set it at 65% if you're just watching this for the first time, because you've got to prove that you can implement the system fully and use it. But if you use all of our resources, generally you're able to achieve closer to that 70-75% efficiency. And when you do, the extra money we're charging on the billable hour goes where?
Profit.
Goes to profit, and then it brings the profit back up to offset anything we stole from it, like extra overhead or extra employees and things of that nature. So it works out. But in this case, we're going to focus today on this 65%. But I'm actually going to show you a range. I'm going to use 50% and 65% to show you this range. And so if your company is very inefficient and you feel like today your team is just not closing the hours they need, then the way that you set your true billable hour in order to utilize the new flat rate to its max potential is by taking your billable hour over here and dividing it by your efficiency rating. And so your efficiency rating right here would be 0.5 or 0.65. And so if I take 200, here, let's move this over here out of the way a little bit. I'm going to take $200 and I'm going to divide that by 0.5. How much is that?
400.
400. You're doing that in your head though, so I'm going to use a calculator so we get them all right. But that one is 400. So that one's easy. It just doubles it. Okay? Just doubles it. But that's how much you would need to charge if you were at a 50% efficiency. Because that says that we can charge $400 an hour, and that'll give us $200 an hour for every hour we sell to pay him $40 an hour. But it'll also give us $200 an hour for every hour he's not selling to pay him $40 an hour, so that our percentage payroll stays where? At 20%. Now, if we can get our efficiency level up to 65% with the help of the new flat rate, then we would, what would the math be? It would be 200 divided by 0.65. And what's that number?
307.69.
About $308.
308, you said?
307.69.
307.69. So I'll round up. But that would be 308.
Yep.
That is a massive difference, isn't it? I mean, there's almost $100 an hour difference just based on a couple of points in efficiency. That's why efficiency is such a big deal, of why we don't want all of our trucks just sitting around goofing off all the time, is because it just costs us a fortune and we have to adjust the billable hour so much. But what this says is what we just learned right here is if your company is in a high traffic area or something, you're paying $40 an hour, you probably need to be charging about how much?
400.
About 400, about 10 times what that highest paid technician is. That's a lot. But then when it comes to the more suburban areas where you don't have as much traffic, things are more readily available, you don't have as much downtime and you're staying really busy at the same time, if you're able to maintain that 65% with the help of the new flat rate, then we can be at that 308. And so your range would say that you're pretty safe anywhere in here. And so if you're really concerned and you're saying, Matt, I can't charge $400 an hour, well then drop it back down to the lower end of your range, whatever that is. And you can try it there and see how it affects your profitability. But if your company is struggling to turn a profit, in double digits, over 10%, then many times we find that the direct culprit is that the service billable hour is too low. And so the service billable hour is generally that $200 one, which would only work if we were 100% efficient. But that's impossible. It's impossible. Now, the only time things like 100% efficiency, not even 100%, is even closely achievable would be on major install jobs where your team goes there and they're working all day long every day. So they're not going between job to job and job, and so they just don't have much downtime. As long as they don't have downtime, then your efficiency stays out. But still, achieving anything above 90% would be very difficult. So, does this make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Did it provide clarity?
Yes.
All right, are there any questions? So when people ask, hey, how do I set my billable hour? We can answer it quickly, but what I wanted to kind of bring everybody in here, Sherry and Emily and Aaron, is I want everybody to be on the same page that the answer isn't just a formula. It's not just, hey, here it is. They need to understand what the formula means so that they can answer the question, hey, what is my efficiency rating? Now, if you don't know how to get your efficiency rating, technically you get it by taking how many billable hours you sold last year divided by how many you paid out. So like if I sold 900 divided by 2,080, then my efficiency rating is 43%. So it's how many billable hours we sold last year divided by how many we paid out times 100 would give you the exact percentage, if you haven't done that. Now, there is one other formula that I've never seen anybody teach but me. So for those of you watching the video, if you know somebody else that taught it, let me know. I'd like to know where it came from. But ultimately, I started thinking of, hey, how can I help a company that doesn't have their numbers in order come up with that efficiency number quickly? And I realized I could get it by taking their gross sales for a given amount of time. So I could take like, let's just say that over the last month is all the numbers you have, or even the last week or yesterday because you just started your company. But we can take your gross sales for a given period of time, and let's just call that, for this example, let's call it $100,000. And so we sold $100,000, and you take that, and then you would multiply that by your material. You would divide it by your material average. So like looking at that same period of time, how much money did I spend in materials? So if I spent $35,000 in materials, then that would be, that would just come right out of it. So I could take minus 35,000, which would leave me with how much money?
65.
Yep, 65,000. And so then I can take this 65,000 and I can divide it by my projected billable hour. Now I can get that projected billable hour by taking that, ultimately that highest paid technician multiplied by 5, right? And so I can take that one. So here I got this, and I can say 65,000 divided by 200 says that out of this number here, we sold 325 billable units. That's how many at $200 we sold. And so in which case, how many hours did we have to pay out to our team to get this to be put in? Does that make sense? And that shows you your efficiency. Were we right on it? Did we get it all put in for that many hours? Or did it take us 600 hours to get it put in? And so if it took us 600 hours, then our efficiency is closer to that 50% number again. Does that make sense? And so you can backtrack yourself through just about any of the math if you need to. But again, if you need help, or if your company needs to have a business assessment set up, where we can do a business assessment with you to help find some of these numbers that'll be profitable and work well for your market, always feel free to reach out at either training@thenewflatrate.com or info@thenewflatrate.com. Or if you're already a New Flat Rate member, make sure that you reach out to your account rep, and they can help you. And then if they need to put you in touch with one of our trainers to work with you on setting some of this stuff up, we're always happy to let you know what it takes to get that done.